Welcome to Adopting Zero Trust, an independent podcast that dives into the world of zero trust and tells the story of people who are adopting it. Throughout our series, we'll investigate why zero trust is becoming a critical concept for cybersecurity. Our hosts, Elliot Volkman and Neal Dennis, will have transparent and open conversations with the people driving modern security approaches forward, while leaving vendor hype behind. It's time to remove implicit trust and buzzwords and get to the root of the movement.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. As always, I'm Elliot with your co-host and the voice of this podcast, Mr. Neal Dennis. We have an absolutely wonderful guest today who has probably more experience and more insight into the world of zero trust than most other practitioners that we're going to be able to get access to for the foreseeable future. He is absolutely not afraid of sharing his opinion. He has his own series that you can actually catch on LinkedIn Live in most cases. If I don't mess this up, it is in the Nic of Time. Is that correct?
Yep, that's the Nic of Time. That's it.
Yeah, there we go. And beyond what you're doing today, your background is just absolutely astonishing. I don't want to speak for you as far as where you were up until today. So with that, I'd just love if you could give us a little brief introduction into who you are, where you've been, and then we'll kind of just go at it.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Nic Chaillan. I'm the former Chief Software Officer for the Air Force and Space Force. I came from France, as you can tell with my French accent, moved here about 12 years ago, became a citizen about 6 years ago. A month after becoming a citizen, I joined DHS. I became the chief architect at DHS and special advisor for cyber. And then I became the first chief software officer for the Air Force and Space Force and leading the DevSecOps initiative for all of DoD and implementing, I guess, the largest implementation of zero trust in the US government that I know of. My background is in cyber. I founded 12 companies in software cyber innovation, built 187 products that we sold to 45 Fortune 500. So I guess I'm an entrepreneur now, I guess a former government senior official, and now back on the commercial side, enjoying life again.
I love how you put it that way. So I've had my brief stint working with on the government contractor side, so I know how this speed of activity works over there. But I'm just kind of curious, what was your experience like just in general? We don't need to go too crazy into it. And why did you decide to pivot away from kind of the entrepreneurial world and work on the three-letter agencies?
Well, this started when there was the ISIS attacks back in France, and I got friends that got targeted and killed, and so that was kind of a wake-up call for me to say, hey, I built a lot of great innovations, with mobile apps, touch table stuff. I mean, we did a lot of pretty cool stuff in banking, healthcare, retail, but it never, I guess, something that would be, potentially life altering, so I wanted to make a real difference. So I started DHS, and then I got the opportunity to go to DoD, and that was really much more impactful, I guess, mission and work. I think the impact I had also in the Department of Defense was certainly lasting and much broader. I think we demonstrated that a small group of people can really make a big change in the behemoth that is the DoD. And I think it's definitely at the same time the most rewarding and the most frustrating experience of my life. I think it's kind of interesting because when you run your own companies and you have hundreds of people in 12 countries, and it's obviously a lot of stress, and it's your money, and it's a lot of work. I think I took like 47 days of vacation in 17 years or something like that before the government. So clearly, it's hard work, but I can tell you that the stress and the kind of the mission of DoD was such a massive undertaking, and when you start touching jets and bombers and space systems and nukes and you have lives at stake, and you'll start to realize that we're not doing so good against China, and that our kids may not have the best chance to win against China in 20 years. that's a pretty big wake up call. And when I started in DoD, I had no kids, and then 3 years after, because I had twins, I ended up with 3 kids, all girls, and so that's it also changes your perception, and kind of put a lot more stress on getting things done, and kind of fighting a little bit the bureaucracy and the complacency that we see, in some of the Pentagon leaders kind of calling China, near peer adversary, and diminishing some of the innovations that might be the differentiator between winning or losing the next battles. And so for me, it was, very important to show that we can move at the pace of relevance. We can be a SpaceX. We can, we can change the way we do business. We can actually build software in a software-defined universe that's able to move at the crazy IT pace, and that we can do it, with the defense industrial base, and we can bring people with us, and we can also bring new startups with us to get it done, and grow faster, stronger together as a team, and kind of raise awareness to what's so important, and kind of push back on the complacency we talked about.
Yeah, that is without a doubt, again, as I prefaced, a monumental background. You have basically seen and done it all. Your exposure is still evolving. And the fact that you're able to bring your own conversation out into the world today, I think is going to be incredibly beneficial. So just a shout out to obviously what you're building. So folks, check it out, use that as a resource.
Well, it's easier for me because, when you succeeded and you made enough money, you don't have to worry about money. It's pretty easy to start saying what you want to say. I understand, many of the great civil and military servant in the government and the Pentagon particularly don't have that luxury. And so it's, it's up to people like me to be able to do it, because if I don't do it, there's not many people joining the government with that kind of already, kind of money put aside. And so it's just the right thing to do,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I don't know how long ago it started, but like with digital services, when I lived in DC, I feel like that part of the world, they were trying to build it sort of like that fast acting startup, but obviously being able to trickle that into other agencies, another monster in itself. So being able to recruit folks with your kind of background and bring that kind of insight, I think is exactly the kind of steps they need a balance between. But I'm curious, obviously with the speed of government on the table, and they have hopes for adopting some sort of form of zero trust over the next 2 years. And I know there's a loaded question too, so just putting that out there. How attainable do you feel that goal is, or do you feel it's a little bit too lofty?
Yeah, so first we built the zero trust implementation for the Air Force and Space Force that's now used by all the DevSecOps teams, and so it's a pretty broad engagement with a lot of the top, most critical DoD programs, all the way to nuclear weapons, to jets and bombers and space system. And we built it in 45 days, and we built it as a real zero trust enforcement stack that's not just using the gimmick buzzwords of some companies, and really kind of bringing a real turnkey zero trust engagement. I was part of the team with DHS and Google that created the kind of the Beyond Corp initial software defined parameter concept. And so I know what it means, because people use zero trust now to have this bloated meaning that pretty much every cyber capability would fit into, and it's just not right. It's pretty well defined if you think about it. And so I think that the issue I see is first, the DoD decided not to reuse the Air Force Space Force work, despite the fact that it's the largest implementation and most agnostic, not only cloud agnostic, but environment agnostic, able to run at the edge, cloud, classified cloud, and on weapon systems, which is unheard of in the department. And so they went and awarded a contract, right, to Booz, and under the premises that, hey, Booz is saying they could do it in 6 months and get a second option, right? With a stack that's again pushed by a prime, where my zero trust team was comprised of 8 companies that effectively were not acting as a prime. The government was the prime integrator and the one doing the architecture and the implementation, and the product owner, versus going to a prime and tell them, hey, just build me this magical zero trust stack. And honestly, the DISA definition of zero trust is very much bloated, and is just too wide, which makes it even a bigger problem. But when you look at that engagement, right, not only it's a single prime, which was already 4 times more expensive than what we spent in the Air Force to do the work, but now they're saying that they're not going to meet the 6 months timeline, and they want to extend for another 18 months, which obviously is mind-boggling to me. First they passed on some of the vendors that supported me in the government on that cloud native access point engagement that we did, and because Booth said they could do it in 6 months, and now they're saying, well, we're not going to go there because and we're not going to recompete, and we're just going to give an extension of 18 months after a failed 6 months engagement, which initially was like, okay, we're going to have a second option, but now it's looking more and more like one size fits all bloated again program that's managed with the wrong expectation of delivery and timing. I'm all about having second option. I think the department should have a second option. It's great, but when you realize after 6 months that it's not even as good as what we built in 45 days for a fourth of the money, you should probably take a step back and wonder if you should triple that amount of money and triple the time to get to an outcome that's barely scratching the surface. It's barely doing unclassified zero trust implementation, where we have now the cloud native access point running on all fabric now. So it really makes no sense, right? If time is of the essence, why don't we reuse existing enterprise services already massively used, the largest implementation of zero trust in the government? And egos or incompetence is getting in the way. That the people running the show, funny enough, at DISA at the time, were the same people that refused and kind of prevented me, or tried to prevent me from building the zero trust stack, telling me that they didn't believe in zero trust merely a year or two before. Not to forget, we had the zero trust stack down about 2 years before they even started their MVP. So we were way ahead of the curve, but yet they refused to use it. And they were the same people telling us they don't believe in zero trust. Now if you listen to people, they're the world expert in zero trust overnight. It's just I've never done it ever, which obviously experience is so essential when you're trying to bring something as complex and in the most complex and siloed organization on the planet. You wouldn't see anyone do that. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
So, quick curiosity question, and from my background perspective, I've been a consultant, but I've also been on the military side of this equation back in the day, before zero trust was an official designated term. Were there some key things that you saw in particular that were already part of this growth curve that you just needed to kind of etch into, that you see that this is kind of missing within the Booz Allen approach for the greater side of the house? Are they trying to basically rip and replace everything and create something net new, for better or for worse? And if they are, were there things that you thought maybe they could have implemented or maintained as part of that implementation without doing that kind of exhaustive ignorance, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, it's definitely a different approach. First, it's very much locked into a single company, Palo Alto, but it's also mostly focused on some of the aspects of zero trust, and it's pretty good. I mean, I'm biased obviously because I have created the other stack, and I think it's just not as good, but I'm biased, so we'll move on. But I'm more concerned about tangible outcomes, right? If it was better, I mean, great, put it in production, compare the outcomes, look at metrics, right? Define proper way to assess it, compare the cyber posture. I would argue that the tech stack is much more solid and less locked in, more options, more diversity of options, more control from the government standpoint, piggybacking on DevSecOps, GitOps, continuous ATO. They can't even get it accredited. They can't even get it running. They can't even get it accredited, even less on the high side. So if you build something nowadays on the wrong foundation and you're not using DevSecOps, you're not using Kubernetes, you're not containerized, you're not using a service mesh, you're not doing a good job at taking care of non-person entities, which is a massive chunk of the zero trust engagement. What we enabled really is beyond just the people side of the house. We also enabled weapons to talk to each other in a JET-C2 ABMS construct. We enabled a Kafka pub/sub event-driven zero trust data centricity capability with the Elastic on top. And so we created stuff that really gives you kind of a data lake with data centricity labeling, which will let us flatten not just SecRel and secret no phone, but also like potentially top secret fabric all into one, really, kind of labeling things down to the cell level. So we really did things that could drastically improve the everyday life of the warfighter. There's 58 secret well networks across the mission partners. This capability would enable to flatten all this to one. Imagine if you have a UK aircraft carrier. They often have, going from the UK to Asia, they would have to swap probably 5 times of devices to connect to the right SecRel network. It's despicable. It's so dated. It's ridiculous. And not to talk about the US side of the house, where you have all these combatant commands having to manage 58 networks and how to push data across the 58 and having to burn freaking DVDs, right? We brought a diode, on Amazon. We connected Amazon Azure Backbone. We added Starlink and 5G options on top. I mean, we allowed dirty internet connectivity with the right crypto on top with CFSC and Type 1 crypto, federated the ICAM of NATO partners. I mean, there's just stuff that we would, we're able to do that would be game changing in a situation where China decides to attack Taiwan. And yet we're not going to make it the default for something that is not even something you can even touch. It's so are there differences? Sure. Might there be things we could learn? And that's kind of actually what I proposed. I said, hey, let's merge the teams and instead of reinventing the wheel, let's do the delta, right? And focus on the 5% difference, right? And it's funny how many times I see teams both on the DevSecOps side and the zero trust side or the data fabric side, walk away because of 5% of requirements missing to say, I'm going to just rebuild the whole thing, all to take 5 years and not even get there. When the 5% could have been a boosting of funding to the existing team to get it done in a matter of weeks. That's sometimes it's ego, sometimes it's silos. We also educated and trained the material leaders and the PMs to not depend on enterprise services. There were so many people burned with JEDI. I remember the Drone AI Center telling me, no, they're going to wait for JEDI and they're not going to use Cloud One, which is the cloud office of the Air Force Space Force, and with multiple cloud options, right, and not just one. And we streamlined the ATO of a cloud enclave in a day versus what it used to take 8 months to a year, right? And so they would say, we're going to wait for this JEDI magical solution, which never happened, right? So they lost 2 years and then came back and pretty much begged us to take them on Cloud One, and we did it under few weeks, and they wasted 2 years of production capability. It's just it just makes no sense. I mean, if you tell anyone, it's common sense. I can't even explain it. It's just what it is.
Yeah, there's a lot of military background once again. So you kind of touched on a topic for me from a historical perspective: data and transition between solutions, right? It does kind of boggle my mind to think about all the work that we had to do to go from one network to another network to another network, when the solution now is pretty obvious from an interconnectivity capability to be able to transfer from one tech stack, one classification layer to another as seamless. There were some modicums of improvement there for being able to do certain data diode type things, but there was always still a layer of implicit trust that had to happen, where something had to be vetted a certain way with certain things, certain efforts, all this other stuff. So the timeliness of what you were doing was always taken out in most cases. So yeah, I mean, from that productivity standpoint alone, being able to get that efficiency and layer in transition, especially on a carrier or some kind of collection unit out to sea, yeah, I could definitely see the benefits and the advantageous nature of what that brings for sure. And it's unfortunate that it's taking what it is to get there, but
Yeah, and when you think of the next worlds, right, it's going to be about timing and ability to make the right decisions, and ideally augmented through AI ML capabilities that can effectively ingest more data than the human brain can comprehend, and maybe give some insights and advising on basic decisions. I would also argue it could have saved life. We back in Afghanistan, we bombed that bus that had a bunch of kids in it, and proper AI basic capabilities would have been able to analyze better the satellite imagery to proactively see that, hey, there's kids in this, are you sure that's your target, right? And you would think it's pretty basic stuff, and yeah, we do a pretty poor job at this. And so it's all about giving the right tools to the leadership and to the warfighter to make the right decisions, and honestly compounding that into a single very well secured but well built architected stack, so that he can really have structured unstructured data augmented with AI, do pub sub events. So you can have a satellite that's taking a picture, sending an event to the stack, and then you have maybe an AI capability consuming that event and augmenting, detecting objects on that imagery, and sending back another event with augmented imagery with a new objects detections on top of it with coordinates. And then he goes to a C2 stack that's going to consume these events and potentially make a decision to fire the tank that's being detected. And then you have a weapon targeting it. It's actually pretty basic stuff, and we actually demonstrated it during the ABMS on-ramps, and we can do this at scale. But yeah, the department refused to make it the norm. I thought I was the CSO for 6 months with the joint staff on ABMS, and I was pushing that JEDC2 joint all domain command and control thing that's supposed to connect all the weapons and give all these options. But yet there is no will from the leadership to start mandating things. And you wouldn't see an Amazon, right, use different pub sub and different events capabilities, different, these things that needs to be orchestrated, just like zero trust. The fact that you hear DISA say, hey, we're not going to, do an enterprise service really for zero trust because each service can do their own thing and we're just going to federate it. Well, it defeats the point of zero trust. If you have different policy enforcement point, you're just going to trust and whitelist, the Navy policy enforcement point, which may or may not have the same enforcement and the same quality or capability that you have on the one we use. Then you're just trusting. And so how is that zero trust, right? And so it doesn't work. You can federate zero trust stacks. It's not an option. And we already did a very poor job at federating identities across Air Force, Navy, Space Force, Army, and of course Forces, State, and Navy. And that's actually doable to federate identity. It's pretty simple to federate identity management, including all the way to Office 365. But yet they managed to do it in a way that doesn't work. And so you can't see, calendars of people in the Navy, or you can't find them in the address book, and it's just broken, And so if they couldn't do it with basic ICAM, how are they going to do this with zero trust? It's not going to happen. It's actually not technically feasible. And all they say in response to that is, oh, we're going to figure it out when it's time. That's not an answer. They should have mandated it. I told the joint staff, the J6 CIO, to be very flexible when it comes to a lot of different things like databases and APIs and programming languages and things. But then when it comes to identity management, when it comes to zero trust, you want to have one option and be opinionated and force it across the enterprise if you want to have a shot at being able to do a secure JADC2. Otherwise, it's going to be a debacle. It's going to actually be probably the weakest access to DoD networks.
Yeah, so that kind of brings me to a anecdote from maybe 8-9 years ago, where I think zero trust as a construct done right would have maybe kept the Navy from getting popped by Iran. I don't know if you remember that or not, but during the whole Op Ababil and a bunch of other things, 2013, 12 through 14, and a little bit later, Iran was very hot to trot, and it was making public news a lot with what was going on. But it turned out that they had gone into the Navy unclassified solutions. I think it was originally actually through like the MWR service, and then made through NWR back into the actual, unclass network, and then mucked around and did what they did for whatever long, right? But if we think anecdotally what zero trust would bring to bear, and we talk about the connectivity layer, like you mentioned, right? The speed of doing things for the warfighter, for people like myself, boots on the ground, stuff like that. But more importantly, it's that day-to-day stuff as well, just the overall integrity, right? Because the moment someone like Iran, China, Korea, whoever it is, next door neighbor who just decides he doesn't like the Marine Corps today, gets into that, even a UFO UO network, it calls into question everything up, right? But from a zero trust echelon perspective, that would have stopped what Iran did day one. They would have gotten in through that network device, wherever it was initially, through the exploit that they leveraged, but they wouldn't have pivoted, right? And I think that's one of the key things I think people need to think about is long-term for the military, it's good for interconnectivity and speed of work, but it also just mitigates those low-hanging fruit issues that call into and question the overall integrity of the networks you're using to do what you're doing, because you're not worried about some non-APT sponsored group from Iran doing something bad, or at least being as effective when they do, right?
I would actually argue it's borderline criminal that the department is still not already fully implemented behind a full zero trust architecture. I think the goal of the DoD CISO was to get to zero trust across DoD by 2027, which, by the way, by the time that happens, which of course they're going to miss the deadline, but even if they did attain it, zero trust would probably be obsolete by then. So that tells you, zero trust I was pushing at DHS almost 6 years ago. All to hear, by the way, that the DHS leadership that zero trust was not the right answer, and of course prevented it. And then they ended up getting the Civilian Award of the Year, because that's what you do when you do a whole bunch of stupid stuff. And then, of course, now he's having his own consulting firm advising people on how to do zero trust. How does that make sense? I don't know, but you tell me. But this is the kind of stuff I've seen, right? And it's pretty senior leaderships, right? People, and so you see the same thing with DoD CISO and career bureaucrats, right? That effectively are now embracing it 6-7 years too late, with timelines that are completely unacceptable. 2027 is 5 years. We've done a massive lift in 45 days. After a year, we had countless programs already on the CNAP, and that's a good example that it is doable to move at the right velocity, and we demonstrated that that a small group of people can kind of move that behemoth of DoD, right? But it's just disappointing to when leaders already start with the skewed timeline, then of course the rest of the food chain is just gonna have that complacency of lack of urgency, instead of being motivated to get it done. If you start the engagement by saying, hey, we have until 2027, the first they know that by 2027 the guy is going to be gone, so no one is going to be there to enforce it. But then also that gives them way too much time, and then there's a lack of urgency for MVPs, and then you see what you see with booze, right? With a 6 months pilot that turns into a 2-year nonsense, and no recompeting the work either. How is that fair to the people, to the company that lost the bid because they said the timeline wouldn't be achievable? No, you're admitting it's not achievable, but you're not recompeting the work. How does that make any sense? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that echoes my personal frustrations. One of the many reasons why I'm no longer on that side of the fence. I left the classified world about 7 years ago, give or take a few. A lot of little things, but the biggest thing was obviously that bureaucracy layer. And I worked at Booz Allen. Booz Allen is part and parcel one of the reasons why I have the skill sets I have today to do the things I do outside of the Marine Corps and everything else. But that being said, I was always fortunate enough to work on these very smaller, minimal projects, 30, 40 people, contracting out, whatever, small scale things. I did work at AF Cyber 24th when it was still the 24th. And there was some projects to do some gateway reengineering and rejiggering to kind of consolidate gateways, right? To go from back then, I don't know the numbers, but a large number to a lot less, and try to consolidate security entry points for better monitoring, log management, all that fun stuff. The only thing that happened well, in my opinion, similar to what you're talking about, Booz wasn't the one doing it. It was the actual 24th was doing the project themselves, and then obviously putting butts in seats to help with it, like myself. So it was a direct military engagement. They went direct to vendors to solicit for inputs, all this other fun stuff. Same thing happened. It was supposed to be about a 6-ish month, 4 to 6 month transition from old stack to new stack, shut things down, get there. They got a little happy with some vendors, and the vendors talked them into what ended up being about a 2-year rollout. When everybody sitting in the office was like, no, if you just give us the equipment, I guarantee you we can do this in probably 2 to 3 months. But the bureaucracy behind it is what slowed everything down. And that was one of the big deciding factors for me to finally step off. It's a government beast. We get people like yourself that understand that this is a 45-day or even a 3 to 4 month project. But then the lobbyists come in and say, no, this is a 2 to 6 year project. And look at the billions of dollars extra we're going to give you for doing this. Probably going a little tangential on my side.
No,
here.
but I'm not even blaming Booz. I think the real blame is at the government level, right? Booz is just exploiting the system, and honestly, they probably won't put the team A on the project because of the fact that they feel like they can get away with team F, and so then you only get the results you get. When I led the government, I had with Platform One and the DevSecOps team, we had the 37 companies on contract, no prime, right? The government was integrator. I had government people for each value stream, and no single company was in charge of a single value stream. It was always a mixed team of different companies, which is pretty cool. It's actually the way to do business. And of course, we had a process to have key positions, with interviews with me and the team to make sure the contractors would not swap people without approval, and so we would have the right kind of talent, in that team with I think 280 contractors. And so I was doing the interviews and things like that. And the minute I left, I can tell you that they swapped the talent like nothing else. And there was no one in the government to compare if the new people were better or not than the existing team. And that's what happens, right? That's where, training and kind of that's why I'm spending so much time on LinkedIn and things, create videos and content to educate people, because you always go back to learning, and with the crazy pace of IT, if you don't spend an hour a day to learn, and you not only you're behind, you have to catch up, but then you have to keep up. And so I always tell people, like, invest in yourself, whether the company or the agency is giving you time to learn is irrelevant. For sure, I recommend, I was giving an hour a day to my people to learn, but I recommend salary, agencies to at least give 30 minutes, but and whether it's a contractor or not, doesn't matter. People say, oh, we're paying these contractors, they should already be good. But the fact is, you also don't want them to leave your program. You want them to stay, so you have good retention of information, and you have the right, team structure. So you want to retain people, but at the same time, you don't want to invest in them, right? So that reminds me of this meme, right, where the CFO say, what if we invest in these people and they end up leaving somewhere else? And then the CEO says, well, what if we don't and they stay, right? Because those people are going to become pretty obsolete pretty fast. And so investing in people, regardless of the contract status and where they're coming from, is so important. And I couldn't really find unbiased content, because you look at Amazon and Google and all these providers, they have a lot of learning platforms, and then you have the Udemy and all these platforms with a lot of content, pretty cheap or pretty basic, or there is not a lot of thought in some of these training. There is not a lot of content designed for managers and non-technical people as to why all this matters, why to pay attention to DevSecOps, digital transformation, all the cyber principles. How do you explain it to people so they understand more than the buzzwords? I did a pretty good job at doing this, and now I hear, the Secretary of the Air Force and others, use the term container and things where, and it's not, talking about shipping containers anymore, so it's pretty cool stuff. But it's all about education and learning and training. And so we need, that's why I've been building a lot of this content on LinkedIn and stuff, because I feel like, okay, we need to have people in the government that can understand the stuff. So at least we're buying the right things, the right way, with the right contract vehicles, the right process, but also the right enforcement and the right due diligence and the right understanding of velocity and results and things like that.
So on the note of training, aside from your podcast, your presentations, if there was one thing to get someone started day one, what would that recommendation be? What book, what construct, what vocabulary term to learn to get them down into the rabbit hole.
Yeah, even frameworks like what NIST has put out for comment, any of those kind of activities, especially in the zero trust world, away from probably the vendors' definitions and concepts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, NIST is doing a great job, and I love a lot of friends at NIST, and I love them all. But a lot of the publications are so complex and so abstracted, and it's very tough to really come to conclusions after reading a lot of these, and it's a lot of content. It's a lot to understand, and so I don't think anyone would really be able to succeed pretty fast starting there. I think first day is a good step back on like basic understanding of agile. I would argue most of the government still does not understand agile, and to be clear, it's not stuff like safe and all these nonsensical certification pay to play nonsense. It's not that. And so first I always push a couple of books, right? I think for the military side, I think clearly someone should take a look at the kill chain, right, where I think we explained the threat and because you have to go back as to why all this matters and why we need to wake up and why this is important. And so I think that is so important to really have a good grasp of. And then of course you have the more technical stuff. I mean, starting with the Phoenix project, right, the Unicorn project, the DevOps handbook, the seat at the table, right. These books are giving you kind of the right mindset as to how to innovate. And then like I said, I release a lot of videos on YouTube, and we do the show where we have guests, but then we're releasing this 45 segment course for different personas, right, for developers, ops guys, because I get like network engineer, right, that spent 20 years in the government telling me, hey, my job is getting automated, what am I going to do next? And so I want to give them a path to success, by the way, with tremendous pay, right, in site reliability engineering, DevSecOps engineers and all these things. And so I'm creating these courses where we're going to be able to take someone from there to there, and partnering with the Linux Foundation to do the right certification, so they have something tangible out of it. Although I'm not a big fan of certification, I think the Linux Foundation certification is actually pretty hands-on and pretty good. But I'm also doing it for managers, because again, I think if you don't have the top cover, we don't have someone that explained things. I think I did a pretty good job at this. That's why I got so much momentum in DoD. I did a pretty good job at explaining things to leaders in a way they actually care and understand. If you go and talk about Netflix to the leaders, they're going to say, hey, we're not a freaking video app, right? But if you go talk about SpaceX, and that's going to better relate. So I think, how you position things, how you'd explain, what you focus on. I saw, the very first chief data officer of DoD was focused on business stuff. And I kept telling that person, hey, this is not a good idea. You want to, we're a weapon, driven, warfighter driven organization. The business stuff is yet to support the warfighter, but it's not the mission. So you should really focus on data around the weapon stuff. And that first person refused until David Spurk really came in and took over and really focused on the weapon stuff. And so I did the same with DevSecOps, right? We took an F-16 jet and we put Kubernetes and Service Mesh on the jet in 45 days on the legacy hardware. And so we demonstrated it was doable. We demonstrated you can do it on legacy. Something that used to be running, Ada and C now is running, potentially Java, Python, and Go, AI/ML capabilities on top and different things. We want to pick the right use cases to get the momentum and get the data to back it up and get people excited. And so I think that's what we did pretty well. So that's the way, people need to think about how to get started, because you need to have the bottom up and the top down support, right? Ideally, right? And so you need to build that and create the momentum. And so a whole video segment that I'm recording now is about how to build that momentum with your leadership and all the different tricks I use to do that. And it's kind of 11 different things that I ended up listing to explain to people. Here's the step-by-step, kind of thoughts I had when I did it, to get where we got to pretty quick. Within a year, we had massive traction and massive support from the leadership.
Nice. So I got one more thing in my mind here. You mentioned maybe 10, 15 minutes back, zero trust today, but not necessarily in 5 years. Where do you think structurally this might go in that concept? I mean, the fundamentals will obviously still be there at a core, but the idea should hopefully, I agree, grow beyond what it is today into something better, bigger, more capable, more timely. So where do you position that at in theory in a couple of years from now?
Yeah, I think it's tough to know, but I think the stuff that I see, obviously, in terms of maturity of your adoption of Zero Trust and DevSecOps, which the fact that, for example, we built the cloud native access point on top of platform one as a DevSecOps construct to give us the continuous authority to operate, so we can release multiple times a day. All these are foundational enablers to move at the pace of relevance. And the fact that this side is not doing this, by definition, is already bound to fail, because you can't deliver fast enough and you're just getting behind. It just doesn't work, which is why they're not going to meet the timelines, right? You have to do it under the right constraints and the right setup and the right foundation, which is not the case in their case. It took me a little bit more time to set up the foundation, but once you have the right foundation, just like a house, right? You don't want to build it on the wrong footprint. So I think data centricity is going to become kind of the real maturity. What we did, where we built a policy enforcement point that's agnostic and not acting as a proxy, but more as a reverse proxy. So effectively, tools like Kafka and Elastic would have pre-hook and post-hook to go query the policy enforcement point, which is a abstracted policy as code stack that's effectively separated and decoupled. So data owner can effectively write the policies, both for assigning labels to data down to the cell level, but then also to assign which user get access to what label under what condition, and not just based on the user identity and the role, but also based on the device being used. So if I use a government device versus a personal device, maybe time of the day, geofencing. So different kind of rules to be able to enforce the assignment in runtime of labels. So if I use a different device, I don't get access to the same kind of information. And so really getting to that, crown jewel of data centricity, the way we built it, hopefully across enterprises. And that's what I'm helping a lot of banks and healthcare companies reach out to me and be like, oh, how do we do this, right? And it's all based on open source tools, and it's the glue code to put it together is kind of the complexity, right? So looking at how do we open source that, or how do we streamline that deployment process to create this kind of data fabric that can act as that integration point. But the key on the policy enforcement point, a lot of people end up using a proxy, which now, if you have a proxy between your Kafka and your app or whatever connector, then the native connector of Kafka and there's 120 connectors of Kafka with legacy things and new things. Now you can't use the connector because the connector is built to talk directly to Kafka, not to your proxy. And so people that do it as a proxy, that's very short-sighted and kind of a broken architecture, and it's creating snowflakes. It's creating also bottlenecks and massive lock-in in terms of vendor lock-in. And so we did it as a reverse proxy, and we did it as a hook. And so Kafka would query the policy enforcement point. So you could still talk directly to Kafka, but it would doing the pre and post enforcement to also filter down the data if you have a PII or maybe a secret well to Germany, secret well to France, secret no phone cell. Maybe the what is secret well and the who is TSSCI, right? In the same database, same table, but it's down to the cell level. And so the query would filter out those cells through the policy enforcement point enforcement, and it's policy as code, and it's all managing the Git repo and all scalable, and the change management enforcement is done through merge request and all the good stuff. And so you remove all the bottlenecks, and more importantly, you empower the data owner down to the data owner to write these policies through a nice UI, so they don't have to know code and stuff, right? So all these stuff that we've been building with Open Policy Agent and all the community with CNCF and Envoy as a reverse proxy, and Istio as a service mesh, all this stuff is a massive enabler for company. But the learning to get there, and first even understand what I just said beyond my French accent, but just like really understand it, right? In terms of what it really means and why it matters. I would argue most people don't even know why what I said matters. If you don't know what it matters, then you don't have the maturity of the tech enough yet to to see what's coming next and why it's going to become a problem if you don't do it. And it's going to slow down your adoption. It's going to slow down your integrations because you're creating these proxy snowflakes that now people have to create connectors to instead of just using the native open source connectors. It's just simple things like that that can drastically make a massive difference in your execution. And that's why you see teams, for example, spend, when it comes to ICAM in this, the first 2 years is being focused on only 20 applications from the controller office because of compliance requirements. But if they had used a more traditional approach, which they did for one program, they did a pretty good job with this side, it's just very slow because they don't use DevSecOps. So it's always like, okay, you don't have the foundation to move fast, right? So I actually proposed to them at no cost to move them to the DevSecOps platform one stack, so they could actually, have a Contour ATO and be able to have a CI/CD pipeline and all the good stuff, which they refused, of course. But you would think if you start making snowflakes, now applications trying to connect to the ICAM stack have to create these snowflakes integration rather than just using what everybody else is doing, and it just slows down the integration aspect and scale aspect of all that stuff. So it's just we talk about culture. Culture is hard, but the fact is, tech is so difficult that it makes culture harder because people are afraid of failing and are afraid of making the wrong decisions. And so you end up, having the fact that because the technology changed so fast and it's so difficult, that makes it so the culture and the fear and the adoption of that change in your brain is even harder. So people that say, tech is easy and culture is hard are completely wrong. I can tell you, the tech is hard, the culture is hard, one. But if you have great tech, culture is easier, okay? But if you dismiss the tech and you just say it's a culture problem, usually a sign you're not very technical and you just, don't even understand the technical problems to facilitate that adoption. So to make it that the culture gets easier over time by streamlining these enterprise services, right? So that's the way I think about it.
No, I think that's a great spot right there. The more you can bring to bear the right stack, the more you're able to let people be people in the solution and do the jobs that they want to do and need to do. Makes it more timely, more relevant, and you hopefully, and like you mentioned, your friend who's being automated out, but he's looking for a next echelon. That should be the goal, in my opinion, of most of the things you do in the security stack, is to find the person who's down here, give them an opportunity to be here, and let a machine do this stuff. No matter which.
By the way, whether you agree or not that things are going to get automated, it's going to get automated regardless. So it's not like they need your approval to do it. So you can put your hand in the sand and hope for the best, but it's going to happen anyways. Just like drivers, you look at taxi drivers, you look at truck drivers. The fact is, whether or not we like it, I can tell you 10 years from now, a lot of it is going to be fully automated. We see it already happening with self-driving and truck self-driving. So, we can pretend it's not going to happen and complain all day long, but the fact is it's going to happen anyways.
Exactly. Elliot?
Yeah. All right. So to pull us a little bit out of the deep end, obviously we went really deep into it, but I think for providing context into what you have done in the past and where you're basically educating people today, this is like the most behemoth use case for adopting zero trust and functional elements and cultural elements that lead up to it. So I think providing that context over to the private sector, and I think we'll just kind of get closer towards the end of the conversation, and obviously we'll continue it on and point people over towards your courses. But for folks who are interested in zero trust tomorrow, what is that as far as the journey go? Is it looking into existing frameworks? Is it chatting with organizations who might have experience? What does a day one entry point look like for any kind of organization?
Yeah, I made a 8 minutes, I think, video on YouTube about zero trust. I'm not pushing my content, but the fact is, if I did it, it's because I couldn't find anything better. Okay,
that's right.
I might be biased, but the fact is, I did that. But then when you look at the publication we posted on the Cloud Native Access Point online. So if you look for DoD Cloud Native Access Point, you're going to find the whole architecture of zero trust and how we architected it. We have a whole hour video on it also. So I tried to really make all this content widely available. You're not going to find a place I know of, at least, where you can just go and find this stuff. You're going to find companies, like you said, are pushing their own stuff. The difference with my content, first, the video is on YouTube and free. But two, I'm not pushing a product. I'm not pushing a company implementation. I'm not pushing one cloud provider. It's very abstracted, very agnostic. So I would argue, I guess it's less biased, right? But I don't think you would find what you want, other than if you're okay going to a Palo Alto or Zscaler or AppGate or whatever, or Google, and they all have their own sauce, but it's pushing, their own products, right? So take it with a grain of salt, I guess.
Absolutely. So, I think we're kind of getting close to the end of this, but I think, the best thing that we're going to be able to do is obviously point people towards content that you've already produced. You've had a lot of fantastic conversations with people who are relevant to this space. But at the end of the day, Zero Trust, we just want to reiterate, is not technology. And I think we've definitely hit home on that in this conversation. But, again, thank you so much for your insight in your conversation. Again, I don't think that we will find people with this level of exposure and being able to navigate through some of the complications that come through a behemoth adoption as this. So thank you so much for that insight. We really appreciate you sharing your experience with us.
Nicholas, it's been a pleasure going back and forth, sir. Thank you again.
No, of course, anytime. Happy to come back one day.
Thank you for joining AZT, an independent series. Your hosts have been Elliot Volkman and Neal Dennis. To learn more about Zero Trust, go to adoptingzerotrust.com, subscribe to our newsletter, or join our Slack community. Viewpoints expressed during the show do not reflect the brands, employers, or companies of our hosts, guests, or potential sponsors.